What's up, guys? Back with another educational video, and this week we're talking about how much muscle can you gain natty. But before we get into that, make sure you subscribe to the channel so if you're enjoying the content, you can get it delivered to you every single week, and like the video, leave a comment, cause algorithms. How much muscle can you gain naturally? This is a question that has concerned mostly young males from the beginning of resistance training time. There are a few studies trying to come up with answers to this question. And typically the way this is done is looking at something called fat-free mass index. So many of you are familiar with body mass index, where it's a ratio of your height to weight. Fat-free mass index looks at a ratio of your height to your lean body mass. The first study on this that was done probably 10 years ago basically came to the conclusion that it looks like the natural limit is somewhere around a fat-free mass index of 25. This led people on the internet to say that if you had a fat-free mass index of over 25, 25.1, you were definitely not natty. So the first thing it's important to point out is studies report means. There are always outliers to these means. The second thing to point out was this study was in resistance trained men. So a good sample population, but basically they were just dudes who had been resistance training for a couple of years. They weren't elite bodybuilders, they weren't elite athletes, and so not really a great representation of what's possible naturally, especially given they've only been training a few years. We're not talking about natural bodybuilders who have been training for 10 plus years. But a more recent study looked at drug-tested collegiate athletes, football players, and found that the average fat-free mass index was actually 27. And there were people as high as 32. Now, they were offensive linemen, and they were also carrying quite a bit more body fat than the other individuals. Interesting to note, if you have more body fat, it's actually easier to get a higher fat-free mass index because it doesn't concern itself with body composition, just your total amount of lean body mass. And people who are overweight or obese tend to actually have more lean body mass than people who are not. So that being said, we don't really know what the limit is, but a fat-free mass index of 27 is probably a relatively decent indicator of somebody who is an elite athlete or natural bodybuilder or something like that. I know my fat-free mass index in the off season gets close to 27. When I'm closer to a show, it's closer to 25 or 26. Obviously, there are people out there who will say that I'm not drug-free, and to those people, not really sure what I can say. I've passed a multitude of drug tests, and if you look at my pictures from 10 years ago, I really don't look different till now. So if I'm on steroids, they're probably pretty crappy, to be honest. And when I turned pro at age 24, from age 24 to 28, when I still was able to put on a little bit of lean body mass, in those 4 years, I added a grand total of about 2 to 3 pounds of stage weight. And that was mostly a sustained caloric surplus over that time period. If I'm taking steroids, I would really like to get my money back. All this to say, fat-free mass index can probably give us a decent indicator of what is possible natural, but there's always outliers. And here is the honest truth that a lot of people don't want to hear. Most incels on the internet really want this black and white line where above which you have to be on drugs and below which you're natty. And the fact is, there is a lot of crossover in a gray area where you have quite a few people who are drug-free who look way better than dudes who take quite a bit of steroids, because genetics matter, work ethic matters, and just your overall aesthetics matter. At age 18, Greene won WNBF World Championships. Now, there are people who will tell you, well, Kai was obviously not natural at 18. I don't know Kai personally. I know several people who do know him and his upbringing, and he was poor as hell. He could not afford steroids. He could barely afford food, from what I understand, and still won WNBF Worlds at age 18. That can just go to show you how someone who's genetically gifted and works really hard in the gym, even they are somebody who people who take loads of steroids may never be able to touch because genetics and work ethic do matter. Now, obviously, when you combine steroids with good genetics, with work ethic, that's when you get people like IFBB pros who are competing at the Olympia. But don't just look at somebody who looks really freaking good and say, well, they must be on steroids because their fat-free mass index is over 25. That's not accurate. All right, guys, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you next week.